The Whispers in Classroom 13. Emily Rodriguez pulled her history notebook closer, her fingers tracing the worn edges as Mr. Harrison's voice droned on about some forgotten local tragedy. Something felt off about this substitute teacher. His eyes seemed to look through the students, not at them, and his fingers would occasionally tap an uneven rhythm on the chalkboard, almost like a coded message. The classroom itself was strange. Classroom 13 sat at the end of the east wing, isolated from the other rooms. Most students avoided it, claiming it felt cold even on warm days. Emily had always been different. Where others saw creepiness, she saw intrigue. In 1897, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice unnervingly smooth. A terrible incident occurred right here in Millbrook. 17 students and 2 teachers vanished without a trace. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. For a moment, Emily could have sworn his eyes lingered on her longer than the others. Liam leaned over and whispered, "Does this guy seem weird to you?" Emily nudged him to be quiet, but she couldn't deny the chill running down her spine. Something about Mr. Harrison's story felt too personal, too intimate, like he was recounting a memory, not a historical account. After class, Emily noticed something peculiar. A small, antique photograph had fallen from Mr. Harrison's desk. Without thinking, she picked it up. The image was faded, showing a group of students standing in front of the school. Their faces were blurred except for one, a young girl who looked eerily similar to Emily herself. "Miss Rodriguez," Mr. Harrison's voice cut through her thoughts. "May I have that?" His hand was extended, but Emily noticed something strange. His fingers were long, too long to be natural, and seemed to elongate slightly as he reached for the photograph. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The photograph burned in her mind. She pulled out her laptop and started researching. The school's historical records were surprisingly sparse about the 1897 incident. Most documents had been destroyed in a fire decades ago, leaving only fragmentary accounts. Liam called late that evening. "You won't believe what I found," he said, his voice trembling. "I was digging through my grandfather's old papers. He was a longtime janitor at the school, and I found something bizarre." A rustling sound came through the phone. Then Liam continued, "There's a journal. It talks about Classroom 13. Apparently something happened there. Something that was never fully explained." Before he could elaborate, the line went dead. The next day, Liam wasn't in school. No one seemed concerned, not even his parents, whom Emily called. "Liam's fine," his mother said mechanically. "He's where he needs to be." During history class, Mr. Harrison's lecture became increasingly strange. He spoke about the 1897 incident as if he had been there, describing details no historical record could possibly know. The other students seemed entranced, their eyes glazed over. Emily noticed scratching sounds coming from behind the classroom walls, soft at first, then growing louder. When she looked around, no one else seemed to hear it. During lunch, she confronted Principal Sullivan. "Something's wrong with Mr. Harrison. Something's wrong with Classroom 13. The principal's response was chillingly calm. "Everything is exactly as it should be, Emily." That afternoon, Emily discovered something terrifying. In the school's basement archives, hidden behind old filing cabinets, she found a wall of photographs. Dozens of student pictures, all from different years. And in each one, a figure stood slightly apart. Sometimes a teacher, sometimes a student, but always watching. Always the same figure. Always Mr. Harrison. As she reached out to touch the wall of photographs, she heard a whisper behind her. "Some stories," Mr. Harrison's voice said, "are meant to remain untold." Emily turned. The classroom, the school, reality itself seemed to bend around Mr. Harrison's figure. And in that moment, she realized the true horror wasn't just about what happened in 1897. It was about what was happening right now, and what would continue to happen. The whispers in Classroom 13 had only just begun. The Mannequin Club. Zara Williams adjusted her camera strap, her eyes scanning the empty school hallway after hours. Something about the art club had been gnawing at her for weeks. Most students avoided the West Wing art studio after sunset, but Zara wasn't most students. As a senior, She prided herself on uncovering stories others missed. The Westfield High Art Club was her latest obsession. Something wasn't right about the way Derek Palmer recruited members, always selective, always secretive. A flyer caught her attention. Handwritten, almost elegantly scripted. Artistic potential wanted. True vision requires sacrifice. The words seemed to shimmer slightly under the fluorescent lights. Derek Palmer was a senior like her, but he carried himself differently. While other students slouched and shuffled, he moved with calculated precision. His art was renowned throughout the school, hyper-realistic sculptures that seemed to breathe with an unsettling life of their own. Olivia Hartley, a wide-eyed freshman, approached Zara one afternoon. "Have you seen the new sculpture in the art studio?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Which one?" Zara asked. "The one of the girl," Olivia whispered. "It looks exactly like Sarah Mitchell." The girl who transferred last month. Zara remembered Sarah. She had been a promising art student who suddenly disappeared mid-semester. Her parents claimed she'd been accepted into a prestigious summer program. But something had always felt off about that explanation. The art studio was a massive space, filled with half-finished projects and draped canvases. Mannequins of various sizes stood in corners, their blank faces watching. Derek's latest sculpture stood in the center, a life-sized figure of a young woman, so realistic that from a distance, one might mistake it for a real person. "It's remarkable craftsmanship," a voice behind her said. Derek had appeared silently, his hands covered in a fine white powder that looked disturbingly like plaster. "How do you make them so lifelike?" Zara asked. He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Observation, precision, understanding the human form at its most fundamental level. That night, Zara began investigating. She discovered Derek's family had a long, complicated history. His grandfather had been a renowned sculptor who disappeared under mysterious circumstances decades ago. Rumors circulated about experimental art techniques, about sculptures that were more than just sculptures. Coach Jenkins seemed unusually protective of the art club. When students asked about missing classmates, he would redirect the conversation, his eyes glazing over momentarily. Olivia started acting strange. Her artwork became increasingly precise, her movements more mechanical. She stopped talking to her old friends, spending every free moment in the art studio. "I'm learning true artistic vision," she would say, her voice flat and emotionless. Zara discovered old photographs. Each year's art club had a group photo, and in each photo some members looked slightly off, like they were becoming part of the artwork itself. She found Sarah Mitchell's portfolio. Her last project was a series of sketches, self-portraits that gradually transformed from a living girl to a sculpted figure. The final sketch was chilling, a perfectly formed mannequin with Sarah's face. One evening, she followed Derek. The art studio was different after hours. Shadows moved differently. Mannequins seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. She heard sounds, not human sounds. Something between a whisper and a creak, like clay being molded. Derek was working on a new sculpture, and the model looked frighteningly familiar. It looked like her. "Art requires sacrifice," Derek said, not turning around. "True beauty demands complete commitment." The mannequins around the studio seemed to lean forward, watching. Zara realized the horrifying truth. The art club wasn't just creating art. They were transforming people into art. Permanently. Some of the mannequins, no, most of them, weren't just sculptures. They were former students. Perfectly preserved. Perfectly silent. "How many?" Zara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Derek turned. His hands were covered in plaster. His eyes reflected something ancient, something that understood art as more than just creation, but as preservation. "Every true artist understands that some mediums are more permanent than others," he said. The mannequins watched, waiting, and in that moment, Zara understood that some clubs are better left unjoined. Some art is never meant to be created. Some stories are better left unfinished. The academic experiment. Tyler Rodriguez adjusted his glasses, staring at the data spread across his computer screen. Something was wrong with Westfield High, and he was going to prove it. As a junior with a near-perfect GPA, Tyler had always been an outsider. While other students socialized, he observed. While they celebrated, he analyzed. And right now, he was analyzing something bizarre happening to the school's top students. It started subtly. Marcus Thompson, the star quarterback, suddenly became obsessed with quantum physics. Arya Chun, known for her party lifestyle, began spending every waking moment in the library, writing complex mathematical theorems. Even Sarah Lennox, who struggled with basic algebra last year, was now delivering college-level presentations on advanced computational theory. Dr. Elena Krauss, the head of the science department, watched these transformations with a peculiar smile. Her crisp white lab coat and perfectly pressed slacks made her look more like a research scientist than a high school teacher. Tyler's best friend, Jake, thought he was paranoid. Maybe they're just studying harder, Jake said during lunch. But Tyler knew better. These weren't just improvements. These were complete personality transformations. He began collecting data, psychological profiles, academic records, behavioral observations. Each spreadsheet revealed a disturbing pattern. The top-performing students were changing, not just academically but fundamentally. The school counselor, Sarah Mitchell, seemed concerned but hesitant. When Tyler approached her with his findings, she would nervously adjust her glasses and change the subject. Some students just have breakthroughs, she would say, her voice lacking its usual conviction. Principal Victor Anderson was even more suspicious. Every time Tyler tried to discuss his observations, the principal would redirect the conversation, his eyes becoming momentarily unfocused. Tyler's breakthrough came during a seemingly ordinary science class. Dr. Krauss was discussing neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. The human brain, she said, her voice smooth and controlled, is the most adaptable system in the known universe. With the right stimulation, we can reshape cognitive capabilities beyond current understanding. Something in her tone made Tyler's skin crawl. Late one night, he discovered a hidden folder on the school's server. Medical reports, psychological evaluations, complex neurological data. At the center was a project name, Cognitive Optimization Protocol. The documents revealed a terrifying experiment. Dr. Krauss and a select group of researchers were using the school as a testing ground for a revolutionary neural enhancement program. Students were unwitting participants in a massive psychological experiment. The protocol involved a combination of specialized nutritional supplements, subtle environmental conditioning, and targeted psychological interventions. The goal? To dramatically accelerate cognitive development and academic performance. But the side effects were becoming increasingly apparent. Students weren't just becoming smarter. They were losing their individual personalities, becoming something else, something controlled. Tyler realized the true horror wasn't just the experiment itself. It was how seamlessly it had been implemented. Parents, teachers, even the students themselves were unaware of the profound psychological manipulation happening right under their noses. He confronted Dr. Krauss directly. "You're changing them," Tyler said, standing in her laboratory after school hours. "You're not just improving their academic performance. You're rewriting who they are." Dr. Krauss didn't deny it. Instead, she smiled. A clinical, detached expression that sent chills down Tyler's spine. "Progress requires sacrifice," she said. "These students will become something extraordinary. They'll be the next generation of leaders, of innovators. Is individual personality worth more than collective potential?" The laboratory around them seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Screens displayed complex neural mapping, brain scans showing dramatic restructuring of cognitive pathways. Tyler understood then that this was more than an experiment. It was a systematic redesign of human potential. But at what cost? The students weren't just learning. They were being reprogrammed, and no one seemed to notice or care. As Tyler looked around the laboratory, he realized the most terrifying part wasn't the experiment itself. It was how easily it could continue, undetected, unstoppable.